Alright guys, today we are going to build the engine for my 2008 Trailblazer, which we are aiming to make into a 10-second car and be the ultimate street car. Now, this build is going to be a little less exotic than the ones that we have done in the past, and that's because we're not going for quite as much horsepower. However, we are switching a few things up from what we would typically do on a 4200 build, but let's start off with the basics. What you're looking at here is a 2008 Vortec 4200. Now, the one that was in the car, we found out in the last episode, was a little bit blown up. There's your problem. So we had to source another one, and that's what you are looking at right here. This engine had around 133,000 miles on it, and as we took the thing apart, we found out that this thing is in pretty nice shape. It's always nice when you can take the valve cover off and there's not like a mound of sludge in the engine. You could tell that whoever had this engine before changed the oil often and really took care of the thing. Now let's go over what the goals of this build are. I want to go 10s in the quarter mile, and I expect the car to weigh around 42 to 4,400 pounds with driver when we are done with it. But it could weigh as much as 4,600 pounds. We'll have to see what the thing weighs when it's all said and done. So in order to go a 10.00 in the quarter mile, which is my goal with the car, we need to make around 700 to 800 crankshaft horsepower. Now, we've made that level of horsepower on a stock bottom end engine, but it required a set of Schneider reground cams. And the thing that kills a stock rod is not horsepower, but torque. And since I want to make that horsepower at a lower RPM, we got to make more torque than what I really think is safe for a factory set of connecting rods. So we are going to upgrade to some Molnar rods and something else that I've been working on in the background, some Wisco Pistons. Now, as you guys have seen in our past 4200 builds, we have used a set of Wisco dished pistons that were spec'd for a Subaru EJ20 stroker setup. And that's still the most economical setup for a 4200 for getting a forged piston that will work in these engines. That being said, you still have to modify that piston, and I've actually been working with Wisco for a few years now, and we have been working on getting a shelf offering for the 4200 that will hopefully match that same price point. On their side, it's literally probably a couple lines of G code that they have to change, and then they have a piston that will literally drop in, but we have been working on them for a new spec piston that will have the same compression ratio as factory, and this is sort of their first attempt at making a drop-in piston for the 4200. Now, I should mention that these pistons are set up to work with the existing rods that are readily available for these engines. These Molnar rods are set up to mimic the factory dimension and obviously have much greater strength. So it's set up with a 905 pin and a connecting rod length of 5.984. And as I mentioned before, it has a slight dome, which will allow it to match the factory compression ratio. It has the addition of deeper valve reliefs in the pistons. So if you want to get wacky and wild and put a crazy set of cams in one of these engines, you have that ability. One last thing to mention on these pistons is they are set up with a very heavy duty pin, and it does require the addition of an oil support ring. They moved the ring lands down a bit in the pistons to sort of beef up that top ring land, so they should be good for a lot of abuse. And I'm really excited to get these things into service, and hopefully we can finally get them added to the catalog. And we got to show them that there is a demand, so Go make some noise on social media and that kind of stuff, and let Wisco know that you are excited for a drop-in 4200 piston. So let's get to work with gapping these rings up and getting these rods and pistons dropped in and get this thing together. Now, with all of our 4200 rebuilds, we try to use as many of the factory components from the engine as possible. We like to follow the saying that, what does new stand for? New stands for never ever worked. In general, a lot of the original components on the engine have been working for a long time, and there's no reason to mess with something that is currently working. The only thing that we really touch with our engine builds are stuff that needs upgrades. Stuff like the connecting rods or the pistons. You know, stuff that will not survive the abuse that we're about to give to it. However, things like the bearings, we're actually reusing every single bearing in this engine. In fact, I didn't even take the main girdle off of the engine. I didn't even inspect the main bearings. I did check the thrust clearance. It was right around 7th thou, which is right where I would want it to be. The rod bearings all look to be in fairly good shape. Occasionally, I will check the rod bearing clearance on these engines when we are building one. With this one, I didn't even bother to look. I did actually check the piston and wall clearance on this engine, and it was a little on the loose side. It was right around 4.5 thou. The spec says that we should be 3.5 to 4, but that's not loose enough for me to be worried about. And I just want to kind of give you guys some insight on how we actually build these engines. Your mileage may vary. I'm not saying this is something that will work for you, but we are definitely a fan of keeping components that are happy and have been living with each other for a long time, letting them continue to live with each other. While we have the engine out and we are building a new one, I figured it was an excellent time to clean up the engine bay some. Now, GM doesn't really do a very good job of painting the engine bays. They just kind of like fog the paint gun over the engine bay, and it barely gets coated. So one thing I definitely wanted to fix on this car was actually putting paint in the engine bay. I was able to find a product called Duplicolor Perfect Match, and I used that to match the white color of the body, and I was amazed at how well it matched up. I was very happy with this product. It sprayed on very thin, but with a couple of coats, it really did a good job of changing the color of the engine bay. I also sprayed it with a little bit of their clear coat product that they also sell, and I gotta say, it came out fantastic. I am very happy with how it came out, and I definitely think it was worth the time to tape some things off and recoat the engine bay with a fresh coat of paint. The next component that we have to install is the cylinder head, and this cylinder head has been worked over pretty good. The factory cylinder heads actually have a ton of room for improvement. There's lots of casting flash on the insides of the ports and little blemishes inside of there, and it's very easy to pick up a lot of flow with the cylinder head with just a little bit of porting. This port job is basically as far as you can go without adding epoxy to the cylinder, but we're still using the stock valve size. We've literally just reused the stock valves. On the exhaust side, he's opened up the exhaust ports very significantly. This is sort of the weak point of these engines, is the size of the exhaust ports. So that is probably where he spent most of his time. And if you're gonna do one of these engines, I highly recommend that you have the head ported. You can still make decent power with a stock cylinder head, but a ported head will see massive gains, and it's worth every penny in my opinion. For the valve springs, we're using our same tried and true formula, a set of Crowler valve springs, which are designed for a 2JZ. And then for the camshafts, we are going to go with some Schneider Racing 66RH camshafts, just like we've done on almost all of our other combinations. We've seen that a ported head picks up about 50 horsepower at the same boost, and the camshafts will pick up another 50 horsepower. So it is definitely worth doing these upgrades if you're going to do one of these engines. And anything that we can do to make the engine make more horsepower on less boost, I think will be a good thing. So let's get this thing installed. But before that, we need to get the head gasket prepared. So let's move on to that. For the head gasket, we're going with just a factory head gasket. This one's from Molly. We will also do some copper coat on this thing. The copper spray will help the head gasket to stay adhered to the block and the head, and it just keeps the thing from moving around. So let's get this thing taken out and spray on some copper spray. Now this may surprise a few people, but we're actually going to use stock head bolts. We have seen stock head bolts hold well over 800 wheel horsepower, and I'm pretty sure my transmission will fail long before we get to that horsepower level. So there's really no point in spending $300–400 on head studs when a stock head bolt will hold all the power that we plan to make. So I decided to save a little bit of money and use some torque to yield stock head bolts. Now, of course, we are not reusing the head bolts. We are using brand new direct from GM head bolts. The stock head bolts have a reputation of snapping off, but only on the 6 cylinders. These are actually head bolts from a 4 or 5 cylinders, which have the little yield portion of the fastener higher up, not as close to the threads. So these don't have a tendency to snap as easy as the 6-cylinder head bolts do. So that's why I chose to go with that. We're also going to use a little bit of ARP lube on the threads and underneath the bolt head, just to help things stay lubricated so that we don't have any issues with the thread. Obviously these are torque to yield, so we are torquing to an angle, so it's not really helping us to get to the right torque value because we are going by an angle. But I just like to put some on there just to keep the threads happy. The last component that we have to install is this Stutz Engineering rear sump oil pan. I'm super excited that somebody has finally developed a low-cost rear sump oil pan for this thing. It's made out of steel. You would think that it's heavy. It's really not that bad. We will also have to retrofit a 5-cylinder pickup tube. The pickup tube will have to be modified to actually fit the depth of this pan. I also want to extend it so that it gets to the back of the sump. We will also have to drill and tap the main girdle so that it can accept the rear sump pickup. So I'm going to just drop this thing down on, see how it fits, and there we are. Next, it was time to drop in the Schneider 66RH reground camshafts. Now, I've shown this on quite a few videos, but we installed it with our usual advancing of the exhaust cam by 1 tooth and installed the intake cam straight up. These cams are extremely mild. They're only 200/208 at 50. We reused the original timing chain and the timing chain guides, and that's pretty much it. This engine's ready to rock. Alright guys, I hope you guys enjoyed our build video for this Vortec 4200 that we're going to be putting into our 10-second Trailblazer project. Now, you could probably meet our horsepower goals with a totally factory engine. But with this engine, we decided to take it the extra mile and make this build even more of a sleeper build. In all honesty, this engine should be capable of well over 900 wheel horsepower. It may even go 1,000, but what would limit us is the head bolt selection and the main bolt selection. But they may actually hold that horsepower level. We've just never really tried. So with that, I'm going to end this video off here. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.